Welcome to this special opportunity to be with two incredible fiction writers. I'm just going to do the thing that if you've been to an event, you've already heard this, but it's important to us that you take it in, that this year's festival is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, Brattleboro Community Television, who is filming today right now, the Stepansky Family Trust, the Thompson Trust, the Vermont Arts Council, Vermont Humanities Council, and the Wyndham Foundation. And you'll also see, if you grabbed a copy of the program, we have some wonderful advertisers who we encourage you to support if you are in town just for a day or if you live here. So if you could, everyone just take a moment to make sure the ringer is off on your cell phone, because we are recording for TV. We had one phone go off in the last session, and it's hard to miss it when that happens, as we all know. So phones silent, but please take pictures, post them on social media. Our authors all love to have our support and promotion. I think that helps them sell the wonderful books they've written. So please feel free to support the festival and them in that way. And important to note that the festival is run entirely by volunteers, free to all attendees, but of course it's not actually free. And so your donations allow us to keep going, creating these great opportunities, and we encourage you to either contribute in the donation box in the back. We have some cards with a QR code if you're interested in donating online, and we really can't do it without that kind of support, so thank you in advance. We are so happy and fortunate to have two of our best contemporary storytellers with us today. Writers who are willing to take us deep into families where economic pressures, marital struggles, and behavioral health feature prominently. On the left, Mary Beth Keane, who is here with her book, The Half Moon. She attended Barnard College and the University of Virginia, where she received an MFA, and she was also awarded a John S. Guggenheim Fellowship for Fiction Writing, received citations from the National Book Foundation, PEN America, and the Hemingway Society. She is the author of 3 previous novels, The Walking People Fever and Ask Again Yes, which spent 8 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, and I'm just going to fangirl here, much longer in my heart. And her new book, The Half Moon, was the Good Morning America Buzz Book of the Week, and brings the reader into a small-town marriage under stress. And then Andre Dubus III's book include the New York Times bestsellers House of Sand and Fog, The Garden of Last Days, and his memoir Townie. His new novel, Such Kindness, is a redemption story of toxic masculinity set in a New England that anyone who lives around here will recognize. He also has a collection of personal essays, Ghost Dogs, on Killers and Kin, which is due in the winter of 2024, and is editing Reaching Inside, 50 acclaimed authors on 100 unforgettable short stories. His books are published in over 25 languages, and he teaches full-time at the University of Massachusetts, Lowell. So please help me in giving a warm welcome to our authors.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I guess I'll begin, if that's okay with you, Andre.
Sure.
I think we're a good match up here because I also examine masculinity in some ways. I think our characters are sort of wrestling with some of the same things. I think of The Half Moon as a cousin in some ways to Ask Again Yes, which was my previous novel. It's set in the same working class town north of New York City. My husband put it well once. He said, people in this town look north, upstate, even though they're so close to the city just south of them, which is Manhattan. It's about a couple, a marriage in crisis, I suppose, and when we meet them, Jess has left the marriage, they're separated, and Malcolm, who is the main character, is struggling. He has bought the bar that he's worked in for 26 years, and he's finally gotten a chance to buy it, and he just happens to get that chance at a moment in their marriage when they're just not really financially able to do it. It's really about, being a couple and falling in love, and when you're young, it's all forward momentum. You have dreams, and we're going to do everything we want to do, and we're going to be there for each other. But what happens when you're in a very particular sort of relationship and your finances and your lives are such that you can literally only afford one dream? Whose is it going to be? Who sacrifices what? And how do you go forward from there? And so that's sort of what the book is about. I'm going to read a bit. The Half Moon is the name of the bar, and it's also the name of the book. A lot of people have written to me to say that they know of a half moon in real life, and that's exciting. But it was the name of Henry Hudson's ship. And so in my area, I live in the Hudson Valley. It's actually not an uncommon name for a bar or a restaurant. There are a few fancy ones near where I live. This is not a fancy one, but it's one of those places. My dad is one of 11 brothers, and 9 of them they emigrated from Ireland. They ended up being bartenders, a lot of them. My dad ended up in construction because he said he couldn't bullshit all night like you would need to be a bartender. But it's a world that has always fascinated me because you don't know what makes a place good or not. There could be 2 places that have the same beer on tap, the same music, the same tired old songs on the jukebox, and one is just killing it. Everyone wants to be there, and one isn't. What's that mysterious X factor? And so I think I've always been fascinated in it as, how do you live like that? How do you count on an income, in a life like that? But anyway, I'm just going to read about 2 pages, and then we'll chat later. Excuse me, I'm on crutches, and I also just recently had to get glasses, so it's really been a month. Malcolm Gephardt could tell the bar was busy, even from a block away, even from behind the filthy windshield of his Honda. The night was damp, the sidewalks along the center of town laced with dirty snow that had been refusing to melt for near a week. Most businesses had heeded the weather forecast and closed in advance of the coming storm, but when Malcolm approached the traffic light and saw his own squat, brown-shingled building at the bottom of the hill, something lifted in his chest and he leaned over the steering wheel. "Oh," he said aloud to his empty car, something was different about the place tonight. He felt a pull of energy, that singular happy chaos that can only be found inside a crowded bar when the music is good, people are running into friends, and the whole place is cozy despite the bone-cold world outside. He tried to imagine himself a stranger, tried to see his place as a stranger would. His place, his. Did it look welcoming? Was it just his imagination, or did the light spilling onto the street give the whole facade a faint glow? Yes, he decided, as he slid neatly into his parking spot and felt a thrill of hope, of faith shoot through him for the first time in weeks, in himself, in his town, in these people, in life, in destiny, in following one's intuition. It was a good town, a good bar, and he was okay, he said to himself silently, like a prayer. Half Moon, the old wooden sign above the door read, punctuated by a carving of a crescent moon. People loved pointing out the mistake that had gone black and moldy over the years, and which Malcolm had scrubbed and then retouched with bright white paint the day after the deal went through. Tonight there were 2 people outside smoking and another woman just standing there shivering, a positive sign. But it meant he couldn't go around the side entrance because they'd spotted him, were already lifting their chins to him. And now, as he approached, he had to say all the things. How's it going? How you feeling? Looking good. Yeah, more snow coming. What a winter. I guess nobody's going nowhere for the weekend. Hope to God we don't lose power. What'll we do without the TV? Ha ha ha. He had to shake hands, kiss the women hello, pretend he didn't know what they were talking about when they asked how he was doing and made serious faces. And when he told them he was good, he was fine, as if he didn't know what they could be referring to, he had to do a better job pretending when they asked him again, not 10 seconds later. All of this was far more difficult without a 2-foot-wide bar sitting between him and the person asking. It was more difficult than it used to be, that was for sure. But why? Because he believed he knew himself, he supposed, because he believed he knew Jess. He held fast to the good feeling from a moment earlier and told himself to keep going, to get through the night, and then maybe there'd be another one just like it. Lately, he'd been having thoughts. While at the stoplight on Wappinger a week ago, the sunset a purple bruise above Tallman Mountain and the wide Hudson beyond, he thought, I could keep driving. I could turn right and head for Mexico. I could turn left and make for Canada. All he had to do was keep filling the gas tank. He was handsome and charming, and people liked him instantly. This was a fact he'd known about himself his entire life, and it would give him an advantage if he were to turn up in some Quebecois village looking for work. His mind glanced at how much money was in the safe, how much room was left on the credit card. He itemized everything in his house that he considered dear, but what was there that he truly loved? The coffee pot? His leather chair? Then the light turned, the thought evaporated without taking root, and he arrived at the bar feeling off-kilter, like he'd been on the verge of saying something important, but he couldn't remember what. I think I'll stop there.
Nice.
Thanks.
That was lovely, and yes, I think our stories have things in common. First, Elizabeth, Sandy, thank you for having me back to the beautiful Brattleboro Literary Festival. You guys, thanks for being here. Can you hear me? Is it all good? I'll also just read a very brief moment. So this novel, it's the first novel I've ever written from just one point of view. And one of the things I love about the novel form is how much it can hold. And I really like multiple point of view novels. But this one's just one guy. His name's Tom Lowe Jr. When the novel opens, he's 54 years old. And it's interesting, Mary Beth, how to go forward. As the novel opens in this cheerful little tale, he's lost everything. He has lost his house. He's lost his marriage. He's lost his relationship with his only child, his son Drew, who's turning 20 when the book opens. He was a builder, a proud small business owner, carpenter, signed an adjustable rate mortgage to have his first home he ever owned. He grew up poor. His wife did not grow up poor. And 2008 came and the new rates kicked in and he couldn't pay it and he fell off a roof working too hard and fast and got horribly injured, got addicted to pain pills, lost his house, lost the marriage. And when the novel begins, he's also had his car repossessed or towed away because registration had expired. He's living in Section 8 housing. He calls it the 8. In the scene before I read to you, he has... The lady who lives next door to him is half his age. Her name's Trina. She's 27. She has 3 kids from 3 different guys, none of whom have treated her well. And they've just stolen the trash of his former banker who had him sign that adjustable rate mortgage. And his hope, Tom Lowe's hope, is to steal from the banker who stole from him, get some credit card info, and that's how this cheerful little tale begins. I'm just going to read the beginning of chapter 3. I have spent many hours and he's in chronic pain. It gets better. It's actually a very hopeful book. I have spent many hours contemplating pain. Its constant presence seems like such a dark joke, really. Like the school bully who sits on your chest and spits in your face years after both of you have moved on. My pelvis and hips were fractured years ago. Do they have to keep spitting in my face? It's close to 9 and I lie on plywood over the cushions of my couch in the 8. On the floor near my feet is the Andrews household's unopened trash bag. From here, I can see through the thin plastic the outlines of commercial-sized envelopes, a sheaf of papers, and what looks like a pencil. On the other side of the wall, there's only quiet. No yelling, no barely muffled video games, no fucking. All day and night, I hear through its concrete walls the muffled sounds of bad behavior. Trina yells at her babies. She calls them names. She swears at them. Sometimes her boyfriend Brian will be there and he yells and swears at them all. Some got their units here in the 8 by lottery, others because their family names were on the list for generations. I got mine through my former brother-in-law, Gerard, who was a boy when I married his older sister, a man who is now a lawyer and who in an act of pity secured me my own unit here in the 8. My neighbor Fitz drives a new Mustang. It's red with tinted windows, and when the inspectors come to check in on us, he hides it out behind the dumpsters filled with wet diapers and cigarette butts, with old TV sets and eggshells and used condoms, with plastic toys and empty bottles of wine. Fitz only pays me 75% the value of my EBT card. It's what I have to do so that I can buy the liquid pain distractor that keeps me from falling back to the O's, that and toilet paper, which I'm not allowed to put on my EBT card. After Fitz's cut, I'm left with only $100.38 for the month. And now Drew's birthday is in less than a week, though I have never stopped thinking of my son, ever. And the unit across the dirt yard from Trina's lives a young couple. He's black and she's white, and if I add their two ages together, I've still been on this earth 10 years longer. The woman's name starts with an A, Amber or Ashley, and she must have gotten pregnant in high school, and now they have 3 brown babies, all under the age of 6. Those kids are always dressed in clean clothes, their hair and faces washed. 2 boys and a girl their mother doesn't let play with Trina's kids, who are not clean and who do not wear clean clothes. Trina's little one, Cody, 5 years old, looked at me one summer afternoon as I rose slowly from my Taurus, and he opened his little mouth and yelled, "Fucka." It's the kind of kid I grew up with. In the next unit over lives an old woman. I believe she's close to 100. Every afternoon, a visiting nurse shows up in her blue Corolla. She spends an hour in there, then leaves. On Sundays, the old woman's son picks her up for church in his sedan. Its rear passenger door is covered by white letters in cursive, Bon Giovanni shoe repair. He's a big man like me, though he has 20 years on me and is clean shaven, his bald head covered with a scally cap he takes off before stepping into his mother's unit. For the 1,000th time, I think that I do not belong here. I do not belong here with any of these people. Thank you. So, Mary Beth, how are you?
I'm good. Very good, thank you. Very happy to be here. I was wondering, if you don't mind if I ask this first question, how much of your book did you write during COVID, like lockdown?
Boy, I don't even know. Good question.
Thank you.
I think all of it. I think most of it.
Do you think it comes into it?
It comes into it just
in sneaky ways?
Sneaky, tangentially. I mean, I think that one of the realities of this main character's life is he's horribly isolated. But poverty horribly isolates you. So I think it's more that. But I think that the isolation of COVID was conducive to falling into the dream world of that story. How about you? Did you write most of it during?
Yeah, I wrote most of this. There's 2 snowstorms. So we open, there's a storm coming. He has decided to open, even though most places have not, to be more cautious. And there's basically 2 snowstorms that bookend the story, and you're locked into your house. And he's so gregarious, and he's used to people. And so seeing him alone in his house, just wondering what everyone else is up to, and his wife has left him, to me that was... I knew I didn't want a mask in the book. I knew I missed going to a bar and running into, my 8th grade boyfriend, 2 of my cousins, everyone's
Right.
always out. So it came out, in weird ways. And I think it does for a lot of writers, even though we say we don't want to write about COVID. If we're writing through COVID, it's in there anyway.
Zoom shows up. A lot of Zoom. What was the spark for your new novel? Do you remember? Because sometimes we don't remember.
I think in some ways it was an answer to I wanted to write about someone who was different than the characters I usually write about. He's so gregarious and optimistic. And, this is a person I really try to understand. And my characters tend to not be all that articulate. They're not people who've been to therapy. They don't know why they feel but they still very legitimately feel those things, and how he was a study to me in just a certain type of person that I'm not. He was a certain type of man who seems to have it all going for him, and it's just falling apart. But I think also, so there's a big part of the book that's about fertility, not to scare anyone away. But I didn't go through half of what they go through, but this is going to be weird unless you write. You know how one thing leads to another, but so they've been through 8 years of fertility treatments. It's just probably not going to happen. I was amazed to learn what people go through, including people very, very close to me that I kind of didn't quite understand until it really hit me. And at the same time I was writing this, my father was dying, not to bring down the room, that's my specialty, but...
You are Irish.
I am Irish. He was dying, the writing was on the wall, we took him home, and it amazed me in the same way the fertility journey, there's always there's a doctor in Croatia who has worked miracles, there's a treatment in wherever, you can go here, you can go there. For him, they kept saying, you know, let's get him to a hospital, let's get this antibiotic, like we're done here. I think it was fascinating to me, you know, when you can remove yourself because you're a writer and you can see sort of a bird's eye view of what's happening in your own life. You know, why do we value a future that cannot be relied upon more than we value right now?
Right.
Why not these next 3 months? Why not this person? So a lot of the book is about, can we make a family just 2 people? Can I make a life that's rich and vibrant without maybe my dream coming true? You know, things like that. And weirdly, COVID is mixed in on all that, and we had to be home thinking about ourselves and our family, and they were all in the next room.
I'm sorry about the loss of your dad. It hurts.
Thanks.
It always hurts. One of my favorite lines from a Jim Harrison poem, you know, the Buddhist expression, be here now. He says, yeah, I try to do that, but I also try to be now here, which I think is so cool. So for me, the spark for this was terror, fear, wounds, demons. You know, I grew up, you know, it wasn't horrible, but I grew up in first world poverty with a single mom who couldn't pay the bills. I mean, she either was going to pay the rent on time or we'd have heat, not both. She's either going to fill the tank, which she never did, was always pulling up to the gas station, could I have $1.37 worth of gas, please, dear? Or she'd get groceries, not both. And so I have not lived that life, and my kids, our 3 kids, thank God, have not grown up that way, and but I've never stopped identifying with the poor. I've never felt part of the comfortable class I'm a member of. I always identify with those who are not invited to the party. And so for years, I made a decision early in my writing life that I was not going to get a real job, as in one that made you money, maybe impress people at parties, bought you a house. So I cleaned toilets. I worked in bars. I was a really good bartender because I was really good at bullshitting for 12 straight hours, unlike your dear dad. And on and on. And I worked construction. I was a self-employed carpenter all through my 30s. And a member of the Migrant Farm Workers of Academia. I was an adjunct writing professor.
Same.
And so, but I wondered, well, what if my writing life never took off, which happened after 20 years of doing it? What if I was still a carpenter, and now I'm in my 60s, and everything hurts for like 3 hours after getting up? Right, guys and gals? And what if I got hurt? And what if I had all of these obligations and I couldn't reach them? And so that was the question that led to Tom Lowe.
Well, and also that you know, Tom, like Malcolm, you could be extraordinarily good at something. I got the sense he's actually did good work, and you still can't make it. You know, I think a lot of times when we talk about poverty and talk about, you know, people who can't make ends meet, there's this sense that either they're not good at what they do or they're not doing enough of it, and it's just not true. It's just not the case. You know, that he was a good carpenter, he was a good roofer, whatever you know, and he still couldn't do it because of this one accident. You know, Malcolm was like that too. He's a good bartender, but the bar cannot work. It just cannot pay all the bills that he needs to pay. And he sort of gets in with some shady guys. There's also insurance fraud in my book. You've different sorts of crimes going on in yours, it sounds like. But there's all that money there in an insurance policy. You know, just why not just do something to get that money? You know, I don't want to give anything away, but it's tempting. It's not something that I'm necessarily appalled by, you know?
You know, me neither. Only one banker has gone to prison for the 2008 fiasco. One. And I'm not against bankers or even banks. A lot of my friends, are small-time bankers. They're not bad people. But I read a statistic while writing this novel. The average, I forget the statistic, but it's shockingly high. 75 to 80% of all American families have no more than $400 in the bank in case of an emergency. $400, which isn't going to pay anyone's rent or mortgage, never mind everything else. And so, I try not to ever write a didactic, I try not to say anything didactic or political in fiction. I just try to write with curiosity and compassion about the people I'm imagining. But I did feel the horrible state of affairs that is this country, and I love this country. But I don't love how we tend to break each other down into winners or losers still. And one of the things that was so clear, just inhabiting this man, is he was a pariah. We are so afraid of poverty, we don't want to be friends with people who are poor. We might catch it. I'm not going to catch that. You've lost everything. Call me back when you're back on your feet. So anyway, that came up.
At the same time, I do have sympathy for, I was at a different writers' conference, and someone was I guess they had a character in their book that was not a banker, maybe in finance, and he, the guy in finance is always the evil guy, like in the book or in the movies. And I had a lot of sympathy for people who grew up in a certain way and then decide that, my kids will absolutely not worry in the way that I worried.
Right.
And so you go the opposite. I think you can build a lot of sympathy for a character like that, too,
I agree.
when you think about it. And say, I'm going to amass such an amount of wealth that, whatever happens is not going to touch it. And that they are never going to have to go through what I went through. I can get that, too. So I don't always like when, I'm sure you've seen it, too, like the finance guy is the bad guy. And I don't know. I think that's people who write like that sometimes don't quite understand poverty either. Yeah,
no, I agree. And Hemingway has a wonderful line in a letter to his editor Maxwell Perkins at Scribner's, where he famously wrote, Max, the job of the writer is not to judge, but to seek to understand. And I don't think Hemingway was suggesting that writers can't be judgmental SOBs. He sure could. He really could. But I think he was suggesting that when you're writing, you should be summoning the higher aspects of your psyche and your nature, and I think he's right, and I think you're absolutely right. I don't believe in good guys or bad guys. If I can just bring in Tom Waits, he's got a wonderful line. This line's from Heart Attack and Vine, his song. There is no devil, there's just God when he's drunk. I said that in a holy church, for God's sakes. What can I tell you?
What's your process like, out of curiosity?
Like literally.
Is that the worst question?
No, it's fun.
I'm always curious.
I want to hear yours tue.
Well, mine's a disaster, so that's why I always like.
Well, mine's a mess.
Well, then we're not going to help each other.
Well, no, I write longhand pencil in mead composition notebooks like you used in 8th grade. The kids have grown and flown the coop, sadly and happily, but happily. You know what I mean. My wife has a dance studio. She gets up early and goes to the studio with the dog. I have this big house to myself. I make way too much coffee. I walk down, and I built this house myself, so I have x-ray vision for every squeak, and what the hell's that squeaking? I go down the stairs to the basement, up the stairs to another room, which is a secret room, which don't tell anyone is not built to code, because I built it the last minute. It's 5 feet wide, 11 feet long, a 6-foot ceiling, a little port window in the back, which I cover with a black blanket. I have nothing but poetry. I've got about 700 volumes of poetry on my shelves because I read poems every morning before writing. I've been doing it for 40 years. You poets, Win Cooper, the best, writing among us. And just as a way to lower the light. And then I'll sharpen my Blackwing 602 pencils. Wow. I'll open the notebook, and I'll just step on in. And I stay until I start to think about things like the phone bill, lunch, the dog, and then I leave. And then every 3 to 5 years, there's a pile of pages that might be a book. And then it's 10 to 12 hours a day of revising. How about you?
Sounds similar. I mean, I guess I'm always trying to find out if people outline.
Never. Do you?
Yeah, no, never. But I am always surprised by how many people do, and it works for them. And so then I try it sometimes, and it just doesn't. It just feels like writing with, I don't know, shackles on or something. And so I'm just trying to always, because none of us are watching each other do this. So I want to know.
And there's no right way to do it.
No, there is. Right. There's not. But I feel sure the way I do it is wrong. So not that there's a right way, but I'm like, there might be a better way, Yeah. So, or a way that doesn't waste so much time. I end up throwing out a lot of pages. So sometimes a reader will say, I thought maybe so-and-so this would happen. I'm like, oh, it did. Every possibility you could possibly think of happened, was drafted, and then discarded. I could tell you why that didn't work, because you're not thinking 4 steps down the line.
Right.
So anyway, that's why I'm curious.
But can I speak to the outlining thing? Because
Sure.
I'm sure there are a bunch of writers here too. To me, the challenge with outlining is, I loved what Richard Bausch, the writer, said about writing. He said, look, if you think that you're thinking when you're writing, think again. So you're much closer to the dreaming side of your mind. So dream it through. And so I've been writing all my adult life, and if I've learned nothing, I've learned that the writing is larger than the writer. It always knows more than the writer. Blaise Pascal said anything written to please the author is worthless. I was hanging out with Rumi last week. You know what he told me? Sell your cleverness, 12th century Afghani poet. Sell your cleverness and purchase bewilderment. Isn't that beautiful? And for me, I want to hear from you, Mary Beth, but it always goes better not when I'm setting out to tell a story, but to find it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. It just feels inefficient sometimes when you feel frustrated. But I'm like 150 pages into a rough draft of a new book, so this is like I think it's actually both my favorite part and the worst part in a way. Like this is what I dream, this is the point I dream of being at. This is lovely, being here with you all. But the book's over, it's done. And so having the drafting, the finding, to have that sort of dreamlike state, and you're writing, and then you think now we're on to something. That little feeling that you get is the one I'm chasing, but I just wonder how everybody else does it. Yeah. Kill your darlings. That's a different way of saying the same thing, right? Kind of. Kill your darlings. Is it the same?
Well, for me, that's in the revision. I kill them left and right. I tend to overwrite. I'll write I have a novel that came out in 2008 called The Garden Last Days. It was an 880-page manuscript. And Stephen King is a literary acquaintance, and I was emailing him trying to get him to do some literary fundraiser. And he's a very sweet, generous man. And at the end I said, hey, and I just finished this new novel. It took me 5.5 years. It's 800 pages long. He writes back, hey, I too have an 800-page manuscript on my desk, but it took me 3 months, not 5 years. I wrote back, F you, Steve. And I didn't say F. But the reason I say that is, for me, I tend to overwrite and then start murdering darlings. I start taking out anything that doesn't serve the story, which is hard. Let's turn it over to you guys. What do you want to talk about? Shall we?
Couple of hands up right there.
So because we're recording, I'm going to repeat the question after you ask it, just so we get it.
Can you tell them to tell us their names, first names?
Yes, and please tell us your name. So who had the hand up? Okay, go ahead.
I'm Becky. I also do not like to outline, and when I've done it, I've killed the book. And my feelings, paraphrasing my long time, is that I like the surprise of my own brain. And it sounds egotistical, but I like the fact that I've laid all this stuff in there, and I constantly am surprised by myself. It's like looking in a mirror. There's another mirror over here, and I find that surprise is what feeds my love of writing. And so outlining to me, I'm afraid I'm going to kill it. Does that resonate?
Amen.
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
So I'm just going to, Becky shared with us that she too does not outline because she feels there's the surprise in the process of writing that almost reveals itself to her that she wasn't certain was there. Is that a fair paraphrasing?
But I've already laced it with things I didn't even realize were going to be important, and then they become important, and I love that.
Right, and that maybe an outline kind of kills that.
Grace Paley's got
discovery.
that great line about that. She says, we write what we don't know we know. E.M. Forster said, how do I know what I think until I say it? Again, writing is an act of deep mining, excavation of the psyche and the soul and the imagination, which every kid gets. It's exciting as hell.
I think that's also what readers are really good for.
Yes.
I have a couple of friends I met in 2003 when I started grad school at UVA, and we don't live in the same area of the country anymore. We exchange work. I will say I would drop just about anything to read, their early pages. They'd read mine, and sometimes they, you give them 100 really rough pages, and they say, "Oh, I love the fact that it's about this," and it's about what? Like I didn't.
Nobody told me.
And then you're absolutely right. They're always right, and you end up, sort of veering off into a corner that you didn't even know you knew that you were interested in. So it's sort of the same as what you were describing.
So I'm so lucky to have the mic, but both of your books involve, you start somewhere and you end up really somewhere else.
Yeah.
Malcolm does, Tom does. So did that come in the writing,
Yeah.
or did you, because particularly in your book, he ends up in a really different and very beautiful place. And that just happened in the process.
It surprised me, and I know I used to hate when I was a younger writer and I hear some established writer talk this way, oh, the character just did what she did. Oh, shut up, you wrote the book. What are you talking about? But if you write with authentic curiosity and bewilderment, right, they'll start, to do things that, your kids will do that, your kid will do something, you go, what? Of course, Jesus. And so Tom Lowe, the character in this book, begins bitter, begins angry, begins alienated, and changes. And about 100 pages or so in, I felt him walk away from me. He was like, "Hey, Andre, I'm not going to be in one of your dark, violent little books. I'm going over here." "Oh, okay. Can I follow?" And I did. It's really exciting.
Yeah, same. I mean, I think my entire book is about asking whether you can completely change your life. Everybody in the book, from the minor characters to the major ones, are how much can you radically change your life after a certain point? I'm going to become a whatever now. Well, how do you actually do that? What's the first step? What's the second step? How do you support yourself? And so they're all doing that in different ways. And so I think I always knew I wanted to end on a note of optimism in some way, and I wanted Malcolm to be able to sort of shift, because it's a lot harder. We look at Facebook all the time, and I think this is part of where the book came from. You have a friend from high school who has this family, and then a year later, there's all different new people in a new house, and this is it. Well, she got divorced, this is her new husband, this is her new family, and I'm like, there was a lot in between, I'm sure, that I don't know about. But it was something I think that I thought about a lot. So then I looked at my people, and not that I want to change anything. What would it take for me to become a cellist and have a different family and have but it's done. And so I thought about that a lot too.
That's great. This nice lady was asking a question, or somebody back here. Yeah. I think you.
Yeah, you in the book.
She's going, what, nice?
I'm Lindsay, and it's great to hear both of you. And I have had a number of careers, mostly being a nurse, and decided I wanted to be a writer because I love to write. So I have a pointed question to ask you. I was surprised to hear you, Andre, say you write by hand. Have you always written by hand?
I've always written by hand.
Okay, whoop, hold up. Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Nancy's question, I think I got your name right, is that she asked Andre if he's always written by hand.
There's a wonderful line from Flannery O'Connor. She says, a writer's job is not to write about character, but with character. And I've written a few sentences on the keyboard, but the truth is, it feels, when it's just flesh, blood, bone, wood, graphite, paper, it feels easier to get into character and more intimate. I feel like, I read a great line from the great Dennis Johnson the other day: write naked, write with blood, write from exile. So I write naked and with blood with pencil. Not as well as Dennis Johnson, but go ahead.
My other question is, if you dictate, is that writing? Because some of my best writing, I dictated.
What do you think?
So the question is, if you dictate, does that constitute writing?
No, I couldn't do it because I'm not as articulate out loud for some reason as I am on paper. I have had a lifelong fear for some reason of not being able to write, to type, and write. If I were to, I don't know, go blind, I don't know how, or something would happen, and people say, oh, you could dictate. And for some reason I'm fixated on that for a long time. I don't think I'd be able to do it. But I've heard of so many people who can do it and then sort of revise as they transcribe, and I get it. I don't think it's cheating at all. I think any way that you can do it. It's like people who say, is listening to an audiobook the same as reading? Of course it is. It's like it's the same, you're getting the story, you're taking it in however you can. In your case, you're getting it out however you can.
I agree. Whatever works.
I type on a laptop. I type ludicrously fast. My kids think, like, they'd come over and make sure they're like, you're messing with us, right? And I would type something real quick, and then one would sort of police me, like, no, those are really words coming out. They think I'm just
Dude, mom's a genius.
But I waste a lot of paper. I'll print out, especially in the rough stages, print out everything with big spaces and margins. And then I do all my revising,
Wow.
in the margins. And then I still do like move number 1, like handwritten from 40 pages to this spot with like arrows going. So I know I also don't save anything from draft to draft. I just I don't do that thing where you like keep your beautiful chapter in a drawer to use in a future book. I don't think that works. And so I'll just discard every draft that comes before. So sometimes my editor will say, well, check, an earlier draft. And I'm like, oh, that does not exist anymore. That's
God.
gone. But no, to your question, of course, it's legit. Of course, if it works, and that's your way.
My name is Wynn. I met Jodi Picoult a few months ago, the novelist. She's published 28 novels. 20 of them have been banned in one place or another. I wondered if any of your books had been banned, and if they have or have not, if you would think of that as a badge of honor or something just to be absolutely
I'd love
horrified
for my books to
about.
get banned. That'd be great. Get so much press. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if any of my books have been banned. I don't know if, I'm trying to think about what would be offensive to these dangerous human beings. Yeah, maybe Townie, maybe...
What about Townie? Remember Townie? Get it?
Graphic sex and violence, yeah. I wrote sympathetically from the point of view of a 9/11 hijacker. That might piss some people off. Not sympathetically, empathetically. I don't like what they did, of course. No, I haven't had them banned, but maybe they have. Maybe I have. I don't know. My mother-in-law kind of banned one of my books. It's set in a strip club, and I took Guggenheim money, flew to Florida, hung out in strip clubs for 3 days, because this is where some of the 9/11 hijackers were seen, and I interviewed strippers. And so she reads the book later. I loved it. It's one of my favorite people in the world, my mother-in-law. She died at 99. Oh, Andre, you seem to know an awful lot about strip clubs. I said, no, Mary, I'm not kidding. Research. 3 days of research. Tax-deductible money. Anyway. Who knows?
Hi, I'm Michelle, and I'm curious about your editing process with revision, especially because starting from longhand. And I'm wondering about how you determine when to kill or fiddle with a darling. Like, how do you make those determinations about when to start from scratch a scene or a character versus when to just fiddle around with it?
Yeah, Michelle, that's great. I mean, I should say that in my own process, I want to hear what you say about revision. I do type into the computer, the machine, the previous day's handwritten work while listening to music. And then I might tweak a few sentences when I push it aside. And so then that way, 3-4 years later, I don't have to type for another year. My point, though, is I think it's really important for the writer, and which is hard once you're privileged with deadlines and contracts and advances, but I think ideally if a writer can put that novel in that drawer for a year, really good. 6 months minimum. When you're away for a week or two, far away, and you come home and you walk in, you go, has my house always smelled like this? how long's there been a crack in the lower left corner of that mirror? I mean, you can't see where you've been with new eyes until you've been away. So that's a huge part of it for me, Michelle. And then I go in and I read it mercilessly, like the reader I'll never meet. And again, so much of this is intuitive. You just feel like, I heard the great Alice Munro interviewed on NPR about revision. She says, I don't know, for me, she said, revision is very intuitive. She says, all I know is sometimes a section feels too wet and I have to air it out. I think it's really important, though, to look at it as if you're cooperating with the truth of the piece, with what you found. You're not trying to make it more marketable, God forbid, or more publishable. You're not trying to make it something that's going to please your dead mother. You are doing it for it. And I really feel strongly that writers have a sacred, I don't have a religion, but creative writing is for me. We have a sacred obligation to bring these figures to life, these characters who visit us from the cosmos. And so I try to keep my eye on them and their story and not mean what I want at all, which is hard.
I think for me, revision goes so the drafting process goes like this, and then revision goes like this, if that makes sense. It's also so much gut and instinct. I think I'm very much a gut writer, not that I don't use my brain, but I think it actually kind of gets in the way.
I agree.
And so if I try to pay close attention to my body when I'm writing and say, you know what, if I'm bored for 1 second writing this, and sometimes it happens, I have to pick up from track at 2 o'clock, what am I going to make these kids for dinner? And then I sort of pull back, and I'm like, this is boring. If I'm bored, someone else is going to be bored. And so I cut way back and go back. But as soon as I can kind of get some sort of momentum going, I feel like I'm onto something, then it's sort of, there's a version that I call the thickening. It's like when you sort of break it open. Anything that I pass through maybe too quickly, I sort of start excavating, and that's what the second draft and the third draft, but for me, revision is 95% of the job.
Yeah, I agree.
It's the whole thing. And the reader thing, I have to send 2 kids to college soon. I can't put it in a drawer for 6 months. And I totally agree that would be the best thing to do, but that's what readers are for. It's like, if you can put it away for a year, 6 months, you are your own reader. You have your own fresh eyes.
Right.
But short of that, you need to get someone who is not related to you, who is not your spouse or your partner.
And doesn't love you.
Who doesn't love you.
No love.
To read and say, this wasn't good, or this part didn't, I don't know, I didn't care, I was bored from, and this could, by the way, be, sometimes I think people say, well, I'm not an editor, I'm not good at that. Every person who reads, who has an opinion about a book and passes it to their friend, whether you can articulate it or why, is a reader. So I don't care, you don't need to diagnose the problem if you're my reader, you just need to say, I don't know, was that good? I just didn't care about so-and-so. I'll diagnose it. You tell me how you felt. You were bored, you put it down, you sort of dreaded going back to it. That's a really valuable piece of information. And, even though I won't love hearing it, I think having a spouse read in particular is a disaster. My poor husband, I've had him read so many drafts. We've been together since high school. And if the poor guy says, yeah, I thought it was really good, I think wow,
Quiet,
you really phoned it in today, Right. And if he says something critical, I'm like, what does this guy think he knows about writing fiction? Now I guess he knows everything. Now there's no end to what you're an expert in, I suppose. And so lately, a couple years ago, he's like, I'm scared. I don't know what to do. So, and it was smart, I'm like, what? He says he will read it when it's between hardcovers, and that's it. And that's a system we've really stuck to.
That's great.
Have you seen the Julia Louis-Dreyfus movie, You Hurt My Feelings?
I've heard about it, yeah.
It's that,
I've heard.
right? Like the husband, do I say this, do I say that? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, thanks. Ken, my name is Ken, and thinking of Richard Ford, and it seems to me Haddam, New Jersey is Princeton. But, the question is, not having read your works, do you disguise your towns, or do you base them in a town? And I'm thinking, particularly, Andre, I'm thinking like Poughkeepsie, for instance, or Draken, or Peabody, or Haverhill, or Gardner, or something like that.
Gardner.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question
The
is,
question is, do you disguise your towns, or do you have a town in mind and you name it, or do you kind of go regionally and make up a town's name? How do you do your placing?
yeah, so I mean, and that's such a great question, Ken, because both of these books really have a very strong sense of place. So the question is that a place that you've disguised, or a region, or how do you end up with the town that features in your work? Although yours I think are accurate, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I think I named it this time, but for years, Ken, for years I didn't name it, and for a silly fear, I didn't want to be pigeonholed a regional writer. So it was just, a town. Okay, it's friggin' Haverhill. So then I'm writing nonfiction, so I just named Haverhill, which was a shithole when I was growing up. And by doing that, I get the mayor of Haverhill going on Facebook telling me that I've contrived everything in my memoir. I don't know what town he's writing about. I had to call up the mayor from LaGuardia Airport on the book tour saying, buddy, come on. These are true to my memories. And he said, well, the truth is, when I was a lawyer first starting out, my wife reminded me I had to take boxing lessons to go to the neighborhoods you grew up in, and blah, blah, blah. I name them now, and I don't care if I get pigeonholed or not. That's my 2 cents.
This book and the last book were in a fictional town called Gillum, which is, I've said publicly, is based on Pearl River, New York. It's in Rockland County. I didn't want to name it Pearl River because I don't want to receive emails from people to say, you know what, the gazebo wasn't built until 1986. I don't care. I want to be able to, it's the vibe that I'm going for, the spirit of the place. And so, but people are so, the fact checking. It's like, well, ShopRite's parking lot opened on Middletown Road back then, remember? Then
I know, that's really
like,
good reason.
I don't care. It's like, I don't.
Alison Monroe talked about that, about Ontario, and she would get the same stuff. Well, the bakery's across from the police station. And she says, readers don't get it. She said, for the writer, place and, actual factual things are starter dough. It's just starter dough. Then we bake our own muffins or bread. Next to Ken is a nice lady.
I'm Stephanie, and you both talk about process so well. Have either or both of you thought about writing books about writing?
No.
So the question is, with a very short answer, have either of our authors who are so adept at describing their process thought about writing books about the writing process?
You said no.
Nope.
And I have written essays about writing, and have a collection of essays coming out in next March. And I cut all the writing essays out of it, which is like 100 pages. So I've written a few things about writing. I have some opinions about writing, but I tell all my students, don't read those how-to writing books. But there are a lot of good ones out there, and people work their butts off to write them. I said, and here's why I advise that they don't. People can be too good of a student. And I tell my own students, don't be too good of a student. Because what I'm saying works for me might be terrible for you. Listen, try it a little bit, and then reject it if it doesn't work. I said, you want to grow as a writer? Write every day, read your ass off, give it to someone who won't lie to you, and don't quit. That's it. You don't need a writing book.
I will say I don't believe in writer's block. I've thought about an essay. I think writer's block is just this expectation, especially in young writers, that wherever they begin has to be good. That's it. It's like the first draft is the final draft. And I think I've always been good at, if I have a talent, it's knowing all the work is to come. So this disaster that I've just written is not it. That's not it.
Clearing your
not going to
throat.
be it. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
You're just... Today was preening. Tomorrow we might get some work done, and that all of the work is in revision. But when I meet people, as I'm sure you do at these events, and they tell me that they're going to work on their novel soon, and I say, what do you read? And they're like, I wish I had time to read. Something just shuts in me. It is the same thing. Writing and reading are two sides of the same coin. And so, I hate to say this, but I just don't have any belief or faith in a person who says they're writing and just hasn't read anything. It just does not compute at all. So that would be the shortest essay in the world. book. Like, read, draft a lot, read a lot.
If you don't read, take a walk.
Yeah.
I mean, the truth, but you're right. I mean, we are what we eat. I had a student years ago at UMass Lowell who was really passionate, very smart, wrote a decent sentence, but his work needed a lot of work, mainly because of the crap he was reading. So, well, who are you reading? Well, I got Danielle Steele, I got your Dean Koontz. I said, you're reading shit. I said, and so I put him on Raymond Carver and Joyce Carol Oates and Alice Munro and William Faulkner and on and on. And it was like taking a young athlete, and instead of him having donuts and light beer in the morning, he was on brewer's yeast and bananas and black coffee and vitamins, and this kid grew like a weed, man. It was beautiful to watch. I want to say one thing about writer's block, though, because I do think it exists, but it's rare. I mean, a lot of people confuse how difficult it is to write well with a block. No, you're not blocked. It's just writing's hard. But there's a wonderful line from a Nadine Gordimer novel, the great South African Nobel Prize winner, called A Son's Story. Have you read that, A Son's Story?
So.
And a middle-aged lady is talking to her friend, and we're in this lady's head, and she has an insight as to what sincerity is. And she said, oh, sincerity is never having an idea of oneself. And I think that we live in a toxically self-conscious time. I mean, everybody is the curator of the museum of me on their social media. I've never been on social media. I don't own an iPhone. I've never been, I have a flip phone and I stay away because I don't want to be looking at any reflections of myself in a cultural mirror. I think everybody's got one eye on a mirror to see how they're doing. Instead of accepting our job is to be now here, we're all going to die, may it be in a while. Let's get some work done. Let's get to know each other. And so I think that the writer's block is just toxic self-consciousness, where we're prematurely anticipating an audience. We're actually also prematurely making a book. I tell my students, F the book. I swear too much in school. So try not to write a book. Just show up every day and ask, what's my character doing now? What's she feeling? What's she thinking? Where's she going? And one day there'll be a book. Someone over here.
My name's Arabella, and I was just wondering what made you want to write? What made you feel like being a writer would be important for you and for the world?
That's great.
So the question asked by Arabella is, what made you want to write?
After you.
I don't know, if there's truly one answer. I had very strict parents. I always think that my mom came to the U.S., saw one episode of Beverly Hills 90210, and then we were not allowed to do anything ever. And the one, I went to an all-girls Catholic school specifically for that reason. I know it, even though she won't admit it. And I have younger sisters who also had to go and blame me. But the one place we were allowed to go was the library. And my parents, I have never seen either of my parents read a book in my life. And there were no books around. I wrote an essay about this in the New York Times. My mom bought the Encyclopedia Britannica, complete set. It was probably $700, and she took huge offense to me saying, I think something on NPR, that we had no books in the house, and she was like, excuse me, did I not spend $700 on those encyclopedias? But in the library, I also had the gift of no one telling me what the right and wrong things to read were. I had, quite literally no clue. You made a joke about Danielle Steele before, which I get. I learned a lot from those books on various levels. I'm sure the ladies know what I'm talking about. Yeah. But, so I would read everything. I read widely, and I knew that when I read something like Anne of Green Gables, I didn't know that it was like the hit that it was. I didn't know it was, but I knew how it made me feel. And I thought, this is you get addicted to it. I want to be able to do that for other people. I want to be able, you want to harness something, and it felt like a sort of superpower, I guess. And so I started writing really, really young. I was like 8 or 9 or 10. And my mom says I used to have her write things down when I couldn't physically write fast enough. She found this to be very annoying. She would make dinner, and I don't know, I was addicted to it. It was just a feeling I had, but something about it felt like personal freedom to me in a house where I had, as a girl, I think daughter of immigrants, I didn't have a lot of freedom. So I don't know. That's me.
Arabella, I was the kind of kid who secretly liked being assigned papers to write, but I grew up in neighborhoods where if you were a boy who liked to read and write, you'd get beat up. So I stopped doing it. And in my early 20s, something larger than me guided me to a piece of paper and a pencil, and I started to write a scene. And I hadn't even been reading that much fiction for a few years. I got a degree in political science and sociology in college, and to this day, I don't know what made me sit down and do that, but the reason from that night I kept writing is because I felt more like me than I had ever felt before. And the only reason, still, even though my family's financial health is dependent upon me writing books, I don't ever think about that. I write because if I don't, I'm not me anymore. And that's why I do it. I can't go 2 or 3 days without doing it without feeling messed up. And so if you're lucky enough to find it young, you're blessed.
My name is Tim. This has been a terrific discussion between you two. Thanks. Maybe the most interesting thing I heard is that you had 11 uncles.
It's on one side. Yeah.
Did you ever think about, or is it possible to write a book about 11 brothers?
So that is what my
So I'm
next
just
book.
going to repeat the question, which was that
great.
is it possible to write a book about 11 brothers?
Well, I'm trying right now. Yeah. So my dad was a native Irish speaker. I don't write nonfiction, though, I want to say. So everything will be, I don't know, it'll not be like this, I guess. But he was a native Irish speaker. At the end of his life, he reverted like a lot of people do when they're, have dementia, and he wasn't old. He was only 76, but he was only speaking in Irish. And one of the things, his mother died young. My uncles would come over, translate for us, and it was wild, that he was going back to a beginning. 1950 in Ireland was like 1830 in the U.S. I mean, it was, when we used to go over there, there were no, on his side at least, he was from Connemara, there was no indoor plumbing. I mean, but he was still there, and I don't want to write a sentimental book. I want to write a book that's very contemporary, but he had a brother who ran away at 13, a variety of circumstances, and he thought about him his whole life, because when he left for America, that brother begged to go with him, and he just couldn't. He was 19, he had no way, he was coming to the Bronx to a family friend, he just couldn't take his 13-year-old brother, and then his brother ran away, and I would say he thought about that every day of his life. And I thought at the end of his life, I'm not a religious person, but I wonder, what is all this for? Why do we mean so much to each other? Why do we carry so much? And so the next book, if I can get my arms around that, somehow will be about that.
That's beautiful.
If I can.
It's wonderful. Can't wait.
This is for Andre. My name is Cynthia. What happens in your head as a writer when suddenly somebody's going to make a film of your book?
The question to Andre is, what happens in your head as a writer when somebody is going to make a film of your book?
I'm sure you've had Hollywood attention and interest, right?
Yes, but it hasn't actually happened. Yours did.
Well, yeah. Dorothy Parker has a great line about Hollywood. She says, it's the only place in the world where you can die of encouragement. We live in a culture, right? A lot of us are older in this room. For many, many, many decades, the novel was before that it was chamber music, who knows, but the novel has been central, at least for the 20th century. It's been film, it's been movies for decades now. And I, all of my friends and family, mainly my friends, get a lot more excited about Hollywood calling than I do. So here's what it feels like. So I've got 5 things optioned. I've had, one was very close to being made a few years ago. Another one's in the works. My agent calls all excited. He just called all excited about something with this new novel with big movie stars all interested. And my agent, who's an atheist, do you pray? Because here's the time to pray. Buddy, I pay you to pray. I'm not even going to pay attention to this interest from Hollywood. And I really don't. And this is where I'm full of it. When a movie gets made, you get a nice check, and that's always good. Who's going to throw that out? And it also brings more interest to the book that people, and so it's all good. It's a beautiful experience. But watching So the movie that was made from one of my books called House of Sand and Fog, Ben Kingsley's the lead, Jennifer Connelly, and I went on a tour with the cast. I did the film junket. It was an insane experience, and every time I sat through that movie, it was like my oldest son was a baseball pitcher, really good pitcher, both my boys, but my oldest was good enough to pitch in college, but he got hurt playing football. And after my son had, struck out the side and won the big championship game and stepped off the mound, some dad punched me in the shoulder and says, "Hey, chip off the old block, huh, kid?" I said, "No, I don't even know how to play baseball." That's all him. And that's how I felt, Cynthia, watching Ben Kingsley utter words that I wrote in a me composition notebook with my pencil in my parked car in a graveyard, which is where I wrote because my kids were little at the time. And to see him utter these words I wrote, it was like watching my son play baseball. I can take credit for making love with his mother, and he's on the planet, and I drive him to practice. But this is all him. It's got nothing to do with me.
I think that's a very healthy attitude toward it. I mean, people can say what they want about publishing, and we have, it's got its foibles for sure. But I don't know about you, but meetings with Hollywood people, there were meetings. I'm like, I don't know if I'm in the meeting or if this is a meeting about a future meeting. Like, I honestly don't know where I am or what's happening. At one point, none of mine have been made, and so I pay no attention. It's a huge distraction. The first one that got optioned, I was so excited, and I think I really thought, it was going to be a limited series one day. It's, now been like re-optioned over and over, endless meetings. Someone said, well, that fell through because we knew how important it was to you to have a female director. I was like, I don't care if a golden retriever directs this. I never said that. I don't know what anyone is talking about. But it is like, at least in publishing, I think we say what we mean. There's like, here's what it's sold, here's what this is marketing, there's no budget, I don't know. It's just like a very it's a dangerous thing, I think, to get too excited about. And so if somebody their debut novelist gets something optioned, I go along with all their excitement, and I think until you turn on your television and see it, just don't even think about it, That said, I saw House of Sand and Fog, and I thought it was great.
Beats roofing in the winter, which I used to do.
Okay, so we have time for one more question.
Somebody way in the shadows.
Back behind the camera.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Peter. Have you in the past, or as writers, how do you respond to book reviews, and have you ever been in a situation where someone has not been effusive in their praise for your books, and how do you process that as a writer and still feel good about it, having somebody sort of tee off on this precious child that you've created?
That's a great last question, because we can...
So I'm just going to paraphrase quickly that Peter asked about book reviews and how it feels to be, I think, poorly reviewed or someone sort of teeing off on your work.
Maybe not the kind of review that you would like to read.
Okay. The kind of review that you would like to read.
I mean, it sucks. I don't know how else to say it. It's just, I really try not to read. I don't read any of the Amazon reviews. Actually, my favorite review ever was a bad review, 1 star, of a book I wrote called Fever, which is about Typhoid Mary. It might still be up on Amazon. And it was 1 star because this book didn't even provide any recipes. I was like, she was a chef? And she passed typhoid through her cooking. It was a novel. I mean, that was so wild. I've been meaning to frame it for years. Sometimes there's 1 star because the package was wet when the Amazon driver delivered it. I'm sorry to say that word here, Amazon. So some of them are just dumb, but the ones that are... There was a New York Times review of Fever where the reviewer just wanted a different book. He thought the whole point was to give this woman a voice who didn't have a voice in history. She was a real cook. She left no diary. She left no letters. But it was really a horrible injustice what happened to her. And he thought the whole book should have been about the doctor who discovered that it was possible to be an asymptomatic carrier. That was just, it was so odd. It was just that he wanted a different book. But yeah, the truly some reviews are like boring, next. I'm like,
there goes
sorry.
4 years of your life.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
You know, Mary Beth, I haven't read reviews in 20 years. I don't care if my wife says it's a rave, and you have to. I won't go near it. And I didn't know I didn't have to. Elizabeth Strout, the wonderful Elizabeth Strout, who's a friend, said, you don't have to read them. I haven't. I said, I don't have to read them? I thought it was part of my homework. But I'm so glad I don't anymore. And I've never Googled my name, ever. And I've never bought one item from Amazon, and I never will, by the way. Ever. But nothing. But I do want to share an image that I think is really important. I think it's really important to write as honestly and nakedly and deeply as you can at all times. And then to let it go and try to do it again. And I think whatever happens in the reader is their business. It's not our business. I didn't start writing to be an author. The great Thomas Williams, the novelist, was asked late in his life, why do you write? He said, I write so I don't die before I'm dead. And that's the only reason I write, so I'm not going to read any reviews. I'll go on a book tour and I'll try to sell the book for my publisher, but that's all I'm going to do. That said, I want to just share an image. Maybe we should close. This is a great image from George Garrett. He wrote this wonderful biography of James Jones, From Here to Eternity, James Jones. And do you know that book, Mary Beth? It's a wonderful book. I forget the title, but Garrett. And he has this wonderful image. He said Jones had to hide the fact that he was writing a novel in World War II in the South Pacific because, if he got up at 4 in the morning to do creative writing, what would his soldier mates think of him, right? A homosexual. So he hid it. He hid that he was writing a novel. And then it becomes From Here to Eternity. And what Garrett writes, and I think this is why I don't read reviews, he said, James Jones learned to hold his talent inside of him like warm water between two cupped hands. Thank you.
All right, help me thank these wonderful authors.
Nice.